Good evening, good evening, good evening. Slight panic, folks. Seemingly we were all in slightly different studios. Hey, wonders of modern technology. So clearly I sent some wrong link, or I don't know how it's possible to have multiple studios. But anyway, there we go. Happy New Year to you. I know we're almost at February, but you know.
Yeah, we can still say it. Happy New Year to you then. We can't say it on Saturday.
Yeah,
No.
I always think when you haven't seen people, if it's still January, it's still Happy New Year.
Get away with it. Get away with
Excellent. It's part of the charm of, like New Year is just continually. Oh, it's Chinese New Year, isn't it now?
it. Yes,
That's like the Lunar New Year. That's right, it is, isn't it? Yeah. The year of the snake.
I have to say, I wasn't totally au fait with what year it was, but now I know. There we go. But hey, so welcome to the world. Hi, Joe. How are you? Well, welcome to a world of thriving amidst complexity and chaos. It's clear. It's
a bit like that's how we started off today, Laura. Complexity and chaos.
How to still turn up authentically and just be honest and own the fact that it didn't quite go to plan. We were all in different studios, but it is what it is. So I suppose that cues the conversation up quite nicely, really. But I don't know. I suppose ultimately it's a really interesting dialogue because I was sort of sitting there thinking about what we'd be talking about and everything else, and I just go back to a phrase that I heard a couple of years ago at a CIPD event from the CEO of Investors in People. And he said, basically, in order to survive the world that is here today and the one that's going to be here in future, we needed to effectively succeed at chaos, i.e. we needed to be able to thrive amidst it. And yet it's around us constantly, and yet how do we thrive in that space? And so for me, there's lots of different perspectives we can take. And one of the things that really interested me was somebody in the comments to my post today had said, well, yeah, but there's certainly, that might be true in some industries where it's tech and all the rest of it, and that's chaotic because it's relentless change and everything else. But in some organizations, actually, it's not. It's actually very structured. It's very formulaic, like manufacturing and logistics. And my pushback was, but it all starts with people. It begins and ends with people. And that's the key to all of it. So my brain has gone into curly whirly mode, as you can tell, and so it just got me really thinking about, where does this chaos actually start? Is it an internal thing? Is it an external thing? I don't know. There we go. There's my curly whirly brain thoughts.
Yeah, well, for me, Laura, you used a really interesting word, right, which I think is key for this. Perspective, right?
Yeah.
So one man's chaos could be another man's order.
Yeah.
Life is chaos. We don't know what's coming. We don't know what's around the corner. It is chaos. So we kind of have to accept that life is chaos. Even if you do work in a very formulaic job where you turn up and you're doing the same things, you're on a roster, in something like manufacturing, but around that job, the new people coming in and out, starters, leavers, they've got a new product or a product has suddenly gone. That's chaos, and it's stuff you, as the worker or even as the manager, you can't predict. But what you've got to do is be able to manage it, and that is perspective. It's an emotional intelligence. That's being able to understand your emotions and your feelings, so you don't get carried away by them. So the chaos doesn't bring your lizard brain, your limbic system into play, our emotional center, that ancient part of us, where that's the red mist, that's where fight or flight kicks in. And so it's about being able to take that wider perspective and try and see the bigger picture, or to understand there's a bigger picture that we can't see.
Yeah. And you're absolutely right. It is that perspective taking that's so key. But that's an internal thing. I don't know. What do you think, Mark? Is it all about perspective?
When you asked, you know, when, you know, what is chaos? And I was thinking, you know, when does chaos start, right? And I just mean in terms of, because our perspective is a frame on the world, right? But for a lot of our lives, our world is framed by others in many ways until we reach a certain point in time. Like if you think of, okay, like it depends on, you know, whether you had things that happened to you at a certain age that drove chaos. But at a younger age, you know, your parents tended to protect you from the world in such a way. And it was once you kind of became exposed to the world in its real way, in the real world, it's like suddenly it is all chaos. It's mad. There's everything. There's so much happening, so much going on all the time. Like I made a conscious choice when I was about 23. I loved music and I loved reading. And I did so much of both of them. It's like I can't do them both to the same extent. And it depressed the hell out of me that I couldn't, because there's not enough time in the world. And I realized afterwards, was that kind of thinking that leads you into that space of chaos, because you're trying to do all these things, you're trying to control all these things all the time. And I think the more we get exposed to the wider world, the more chaos there is in that world. And then the more we begin to see it. And do a lot of us then try to fight for our own corner of the world? And I think maybe it's a reflection of a lot of what's going on in our society, across our society, that people are fighting for the way, like Make America Great Again is a great example, right? People want the world to go back to something they think they understood. And that's removing the chaos that's around it. That's bringing it back to something simple and easy to understand, that they felt comfortable, they felt they liked. Whether that's right or wrong, like, is the question really that they're looking for the simplification of things so they can understand it. A little bit like what Brexit happened in the UK. Look at both sides of the argument, you know, and what they kind of meant. And like, trying to understand the EU is beyond complex. Like, you know, that institution, you know, it's like, I had a good argument with an economist once about it, like, and they were saying, look, you're not meant to understand it. You know, I was like, well, hold on, I'm an economist too. I've done economics, but what do you mean I'm not meant to understand it? Like, that in itself would drive you away from the thing. But it just goes to show you, when you try to understand it, the chaos and the complexity in it became more difficult. So Brexit becomes a more sensible and easier option. You mean we can protect everything for us, take all this money back? Simplification. And isn't that kind of the difference? Like, so perspective is 100%. There's so much truth to it, to how we see it as the chaos. And isn't it, we're trying to simplify. Once we simplify our perspective to something simple, then we can rest our head in that space. And that's suddenly the chaos gets a bit easier, because we can rest our head.
Yeah, no, I think you're absolutely right, Mark. It's that chaos comes from, there is so much stuff out there, and it is that simplification. I mean, I call it grounding personally, where, you know, it's that being grounded wholeheartedly in ourselves. In fact, I had this very conversation with somebody this morning, and, you know, she was in the sort of, and it wasn't me in the dizzy wizzy space or curly whirly brain space, as my youngest niece says it is. It was me having a conversation with somebody else who was. And I said, I so recognize that space, because it's when you're being drawn by all these things around you, if you're not grounded in yourself, and it, you know, as I talk about brand me, who am I, what matters most to me, and what do I want to feel, and give yourself very clear grounding around that. It's too easy. So back to your choices, do I read a book or do I practice music? I can't do both. It's a very conscious choice based around, you know, ultimately a preference you're taking at that particular point in time, that's saying, I'm grounding myself because I am making a choice that I'm assuming, because you always talk about books and the books that you've read, books perhaps maybe got a preference, but maybe not. Maybe it's still a tug of war between the two. But I see that is that when you take that active choice and ground yourself in the knowledge of taking that active choice, suddenly that chaos around you doesn't feel so chaotic.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's about being deliberate with your focus, Laura, isn't it?
Absolutely.
Because you know, and in the modern world, what's different now to 30 years ago, life is complex and chaotic, but it feels even more complex and even more chaotic now because we've got information fired at us from all directions. We've got all the information and all the communication channels in the world at our fingertips at all times. Yeah. And never before in human history has that been the case. So it's, our minds thrive and are at their best when we have single focus. And these days, that is so difficult. Mark talked about childhood there. And when I was a kid, single focus was easy. My parents kept my world simple and straightforward, and I just dealt with what was in front of me. As an adult, all of a sudden, I've got responsibilities. I've got lots of people who want my time. I've got lots of things that want my attention. And as Mark said, there's lots of things I like doing. There's lots of things I'm interested in. And so much of it happens all at the same time. Mm-hmm. And I remember when I used to work for the BBC, there'd be a Saturday afternoon, I worked for the digital team, and there'd be sort of 4 or 5 assistant producers in. And it could be like this weekend, for instance, where you've got the Six Nations, you've got the Premier League, you had some sort of swimming competition, all these different, and we had to keep across all of it. And there we are. And I remember looking at sort of 5 or 6 screens. And the same when I'm directing television, right? I've got 10 to 15 sources that I am making into one program that people are watching. That's chaos. That's complex. But because I've managed to train myself to focus on one thing at a time, for me, TV directing, you have to be 2 steps ahead, but it's what's the next one. So I'm looking at my next source. I'm not interested in what's happening in the other 14. And that's the same with life. That's how you keep your peace of mind, by focusing on one thing at a time. So it doesn't feel like chaos, because it is chaos, and we can either descend into the chaos, or we can, as you say, Laura, be grounded and centered and anchored in who we are, what we really care about, and where we want to put our focus.
I think that's the key thing, isn't it? It's, like one of the things that's going through my mind is, how do we do that? How do we ground that? And I think it's definitely, we have to be very clear about who we are and what matters to us. That's without a doubt. But how do we keep centered when, so you take your example of, this weekend and all the various different sporting things that are going on. I have to say, I can't repeat all of the ones because I can't remember, because I'm not really quite as up in the sport as you are. But I instantly went to a place of, but technology allows you, I think of my Virgin Media, not that it's an advert for Virgin Media, but I can record half of that if I wanted to. So that almost says, well, I could end up recording all of these things. So I could actually watch all of those things. But instantly you kind of can then very easily see how you could still get drawn into the chaos, because you're not making actually a choice. You're just stretching yourself further and further and further to a point where actually that's not healthy in itself.
The Latin word, the root of the word decide is from Latin, and it actually means to cut away, which I think is brilliant in terms of it's like, how instructive it is, because that's what you do with a decision. You cut away the other options because this is what I'm going to do. And when we don't make decisions, things get more complex and it causes more chaos. Now, look at making wrong decisions can cause, particularly in a business perspective, can cause chaos and more complexity than is necessary. So maybe decision making isn't always the right way or the right thing. But awareness is clearly a critical part of it. Like, to your point there, Dan, about how your awareness was a focus on the certain thing that had to happen, and when we're in complexity and we're in chaos, right? If our awareness is on all the chaos, we can't fix the problem. If our awareness is in the level of complexity, rather than our awareness is on the solution that we're looking for, as opposed to the problem that we're looking at. And it is that kind of reframe and that perspective shift in what we do to bring it to the other side. And I think that's the important thing. That's how we get kind of laser focused through it and through that complexity and chaos, because it's always around us. It's around us all the time. Like, if you think about it, one of the greatest examples is the very first time you sit into a car, it's bananas. Like, you've got like 2 you've got three. Okay, automatics are getting more popular, but most of us would have learned how to drive on a manual car. So you've got three pedals, you've got a stick here, you've got a steering wheel, you've got two mirrors, and you've got another mirror here. Some people don't even realize that yet. And yet you've got cars, you've got buses, you've got pedestrians, you've got cyclists. It's mayhem. Like, it's like in your brain. It's like, what's going on? What? No one, like, just like this. But now you can get into the car, and it's so programmed into you. You could actually have phone in one hand, a cup of coffee in the other hand, and you're actually trying to steer it with your feet. Like,
you've clearly seen me driving them, Mark.
But like that's the complexity and the chaos. And look at how we can deal with it. And like, you can now drive 100 miles and then stop and get out of the car and go, "The hell did I get here? How did that happen?" Because the brain can just take over and allow us to think, kind of functioning brain can take over. So is there that kind of awareness and knowledge? Like, we have to live into it and start experiencing it and understanding it and not allowing it take over us and start to deal with it. Because like when it takes over us, you look at people who never actually get to learn how to drive because the panic gets too much, the chaos takes over, and they never actually get through that first instant of
it. And so I guess the thing where I'm kind of, there's part of me that says actually in that, if you take the driving example, you're actually simplifying it in some ways, in a way that actually you get used to it, because you goes through that whole thing of, well, never done it before, so it's always going to be slightly chaotic the first time you do it. Then you get used to it so that it becomes a bit more normal, and then you simplify it because actually you've become so used to it. So there's sound in the way you've described it, there's a natural process that you go through any of that. I suppose argue it's simplification that works for ourselves. I guess the whole thing is it starts with being intentional when you get into that space. And go, right, okay, I've got to focus and think about what I am doing and being intentional the first time I do, or the first few times, until that sort of chaotic madness has dissipated, because actually you've grounded yourself in what's there. I mean, would you say that's true, or have I massively oversimplified it?
Well, I think we want to simplify it, don't we, Laura? We our brains and our minds work in a way where they want to be efficient. So they're superb, but things like Mark saying there. When you think about all the things you've got to have your attention on when you're driving a car, especially like on a motorway or 4 or 5 lanes of traffic or something, but yet our brains are so flexible and so elastic and so good at learning that actually it takes care of a lot of that for us. So all we have to focus on is not crashing into the thing in front. How fast are we going? How slow are we going? Are we pressing the accelerator now, or are we pressing the brake? And that's how we work, right? We boil things down into choices, this or that.
Yeah.
And that's how life then feels simple, like we're making simple binary choices. That's not really what's going on. There's unconscious systems running. There's autopilot going on. There's the brain using muscle memory and learned behaviors to do things. Like Mark said, you do that journey. The amount of times I drive home from work and then think, oh, wow, I'm home. Because my mind was still thinking about the things that had gone wrong in the TV program, not on what I was doing, but yet my unconscious mind and my brain were taking care of the driving for me. It did it for me while I was busy going, oh no, I messed that shot up. So that's how we thrive, by boiling things down to simple choices. Yeah. This or that, yes or no.
I think when we get so good with the complexity, like the thing of driving home, right? Every one of us has been driving a car, and suddenly you're conscious that there's something there, and somebody over there is going to do something. And suddenly you're like, oh, and somebody swerves in. Like, so did we see the future? Or like, what is that part of you that gets so in tune with the complexity? It's like imagine for yourself, Dan, if you're looking at all those TV screens, and I used to work in a very high dynamic operational environment in financial institutions, and you have so many things going on all the time. You're trying to make these payments, you're trying to meet this client, you're trying to talk to these customers, you're trying to do all these different things all the time. And you just be in the zone, right? We'll do that, we'll do this, we'll do this, we'll do this, and you're just stepping in from one thing to the next because you've managed to find a system. Now, look, it's also the kind of thing that can burn you out because of how you do it. So because you get used to the complexity and the chaos, you suddenly assume I can deal with this all the time. But back to the whole start where you're talking about being grounded, Laura, and being conscious of where yourself are. If you lose that grounding when you're doing that whole thing, you become a part of the complexity and the chaos rather than dealing with the complexity and the chaos. And then, so we internalize it a little bit, and then that becomes a real big problem for us.
And I think that's the key for me, because that's, in my own personal experience, that's what I recognize I lost because of things well beyond my control. And I don't think I fully realized it until I actually experienced it. Because I was exactly that person doing all of that, multitasking. I hadn't realized that I pushed, the limits to the level that I had. And then suddenly, the grounding from me was just literally taken from beneath me. And I hadn't got that ready framework to go, okay, well, look, I've had a major identity shift. How do I get that back on track, that grounding? So I was just drawn into the noise, and hence why I went out on a beach for 2 months, was because I actually had to stop the noise around me. And I see it, having that kind of re-established that grounding, I can see it in so many people who are just like rushing around almost slightly frenetic and wondering why they feel disconnected, why they feel stressed and whatever else, because they are not grounded. Jo's saying she resonates very much with what I'm saying. And I think it, because I would have said, no, I was fine. I was totally grounded. I was definitely self-aware. I consider myself to be relatively emotionally intelligent. It's all a matter of perspective. But still, the world around me so fundamentally changed that it really changed the very essence of me. And it's like almost, I use the metaphor of a tree and our innate strength and the depth and the width of our root network. It was almost like the root network had disappeared. And so therefore I was effectively more like just a twig sitting at the top with no root network whatsoever. So of course I just got drawn into the storm. And I think that's what I see increasingly. People are feeling like, where do I deal with this? What do I do with this space? And how can I take back the control in order not to get lost to the chaos and the complexity? When I still have to show up to work, I still have a family to support potentially. I mean, obviously I didn't, but I think that's how do we do that? How do we notice that something shifted? What's the signs? I mean, I can tell you how it felt for me, which was very much a case of I felt like I was living in a parallel universe to the one that everybody else was very happy in, and I was wading through treacle. It was a very real, and I could feel like there were two persons to me. You couldn't see it. I'd be saying things, but it was like this whole disconnect between this outer person and this inner person.
Yeah.
And I now see it in a lot of people.
Yeah, I totally resonate with that, Laura. So I did a talk on burnout yesterday, and it took me back to when I burnt out. And that kind of that outer body nature of when, and it, God, does it feel like chaos at that time. I couldn't, and grounded, I think is the right word. I felt like sometimes it felt like things were going in slow motion. And I just thought, well, what's going on? And at other times it felt like everything was on fast forward and I just couldn't grasp anything. I couldn't get grounded. I couldn't find myself in amongst all of it because I totally lost sight of who that was. And during my talk yesterday, somebody said to me, or asked me a question at the end, and they said, Dan, look, for somebody who feels like they're heading for burnout, or for somebody who is got to that point of burnout, what do you recommend? So I said, stop. That's what I recommend. Stop.
Yeah.
Because until you just stop, but even if it's just for 20 minutes or half an hour, and just take a beat, take a few deep breaths, and just say, what's going on here? Who am I in relation to all this stuff that's going on, and all this thing I'm trying to grasp hold of, and all these things that are just pulling me from here to there to there to there? Reset, just stop and reset, and just clear all the noise away. Even, if you can just take 5-10 minutes to yourself and go, right, what's the next step here for me? What do I need to put my attention on? Because you don't need to have your attention on everything that's going on around you. And I think that's the mistake we often make. That's the mistake I made. I felt like I was responsible for, and I had to be across a lot of things all going on at once. And eventually I just went pop, because we're just not wired that way. So, that's what I say to people. They say, oh, Dan, if we're heading for burnout, what do we do? Stop.
Yeah, so I get that. I think one of the biggest things that made a difference for myself was making a commitment to self, which I wrote on a piece of paper that I literally dotted around the house as, like, because sometimes it's hard to go to stop yourself. But if you've got a visual reminder somewhere to, like, go, you go. And I used to have, I did some training with a lady a few years back. And she used to, and I didn't get it at first, I will say. She used to go, you're not grounded, Laura. You're not grounded. I just go, what the hell do you mean? And it would be because I was in that noise. So I would be, my brain would be at 1,000,000 miles an hour. And, I know I do have a curly-whirly brain, but I probably had curly-whirly conversations as well, because that's where my brain was, in the noise. I don't know. It's one of those things where I now realise what that difference is, and absolutely, as you say, Dan, taking that step back to go stop. Sometimes for me personally, I have to visualise it. So having the thing on the wall that says to give me that extra focus is a good thing. Particularly as there's no one else in the house with me to go, you're not grounded. But yeah, it's sometimes I don't think we notice that we're that close to burnout.
Well, like, the word stop to many is abhorrent. Like, I don't have time to stop. I can't stop. It's the hare in Alice in Wonderland, isn't it? Like, it's that's what we are, isn't it? Like, and it's like, I know that's still me. Like, there's a part of me that's like, oh, I have to do this, and I'll get up on Saturday, I have to do that, and this, and this, and this, and this, and this. I've got all these things on, then I can stop. So wait a second, I can't do all of that. It's not possible. But without taking that step back to know that I can't do all that, I'll try and do all that, and then I wonder where the day went, and then you wonder, why do I not have time for myself? Because I'm giving it all away, giving every single bit of myself away because you don't do it. But I think one of the other things that's most interesting in the chaos piece that we go through in this life is, and Laura, like, and everyone knows it, that there's some life changes in an instant sometimes, and changes completely in an instant. You get a phone call, you get something drastic happens, and that's very difficult to thrive in those spaces. And sometimes it is surviving in those spaces for a while, because the emotional impact of those things is so severe and so strong that it's hard to find solid ground, and that can be very, very tough when we see people thriving around us and then trying to find that solid ground. And it's a journey, I know, that we have to go through in those spaces until we can kind of come to terms with the emotions, and kind of when we manage to learn how to stop and start trying to find where is our own control in all of what's happening, because whenever this has happened, it's always outside of our control. And we always spend our time thinking, what could I have done? Could I have done anything different? Or, where can I help, or whatever? But it's back to, where am I now? What can I control? And how can I kind of be me in the space? And sometimes it needs a little bit of selfishness to wind us back a little bit before we can then be our best self in helping out.
I'm totally with you on that, Rob. Jo said she didn't know she was teetering until she tipped into burnout, and I have to say that was my experience as well. It's like one minute I was fine, and the next minute I was definitely not fine. And therein lies the challenge. I think, for me, part of really getting back to grips with who I was and what mattered most to me was part of that grounding exercise, so that I didn't get drawn in, so that if I felt I needed to be a bit selfish because I had this sort of, I don't know, call it a plan of what I was going to do, I found it easier to say no, because one of the things that I noticed a lot of people struggle with is that little word called no. And a lot of it's because, if I take my example is, and I was talking with somebody about it today, it was people kind of make suggestions and they're based on their own lens of the world. And, and I had to have this very big conversation with someone very close to me recently and saying, yeah, but that's absolutely brilliant if you have got kids and you've got this. And I said, I haven't got any of that. So trying to suggest those things when that's not a world that I'm even exposed to. I mean, yes, I am by default through, family, but that's not my world. It's like, that's just added noise to me. It's not actually helpful to me. So I have to do things slightly differently. So what I'm doing in the way I'm doing it is right for me. But I had to go through quite a lot of grounding to be able to give that structure to myself in order to be able to sort of go, no, this is how I can remain calm in amongst the chaos of what everybody else is doing. I think it's, people, there is lots of things to do, but if we, are too drawn into that space, we can suddenly find, aside from the societal, familial expectations and all the rest of it, we can suddenly go, oh, okay, well, where am I in all of this? It's too easy to get drawn into it. Sharon Ann is saying, she resonates with what you just said. 1 minute I'm fine and the next I'm not. The struggle that belief due to fear, doubt, and insecurities. And I totally get that.
And that's what it is to be human, isn't it? Fear, doubt, and insecure. And that's why, while you're talking there, Laura, the phrase "make hay while the sun shines" came to me, because we have to put some work in to understand who we are. We have to put some work in to turn our attention inwards, to practice mindfulness, so we can cultivate a bit of space in our heads, so it's not complex and chaos in our mind. When I was heading for burnout, my mind used to race at 100 miles an hour. It skipped from one thing to the next, to the next, to the next, and it never stopped because I didn't put the work in. When I was in a good grounded place, when life was roses and everything was great, before you get the kick in the balls that inevitably delivers you at some point, I didn't put any work in to really understand who I was, to be mindful, to understand my feelings and what they were telling me, my emotions and what they were telling me, and create that bit of space between what happens and what I do about it, what Viktor Frankl calls stimulus and response.
Right.
And that's the key, isn't it? That so we have to practice mindfulness. So when life inevitably, because it's gonna, right? The one thing we can guarantee in life is change. And we are all at some point or another going to get something that shocks us to our core, that happens to us, that comes out of nowhere, that we weren't expecting. So if we've made hay while the sun shines, if we put the work in, if we've got to know ourselves and understand ourselves, and we've got a regular mindful practice or a meditation practice, something to widen our perspective, to create a bit of space around our thoughts and feelings, so we can identify as the observer of them and not them themselves. Because I think that's the mistake we all make. That's what burnt me out, was I thought I was my thoughts and feelings. And I didn't realize that actually I am the awareness, I am the witness, I am the observer. But that takes practice to do that.
Yeah.
You've got to make hay while the sun shines, ready for when the inevitable baseball bat comes along.
Inevitable baseball bat. I think the thing that just in you two guys, I think there's something that I've also got very comfortable with, and that is not knowing everything and actually knowing that it will be okay. It's like I've taken on another role, this time with the NHS, not the police. And there's a guy who's part of the group kept saying to me, but what are you going to do with that? And I said, I haven't quite worked it out yet because I haven't had enough conversations to understand where all the members of the group are. And until I've done that and had a conversation with the partners and all the rest of it, I don't know. But I'm quite fine with it. And he was really struggling with this sort of lack of me, sort of, the lack of certainty with which I could say. I said, I'm going to go through this process. So I was trying to explain the process. And we must have had about 3 conversations about him sort of concerned that I didn't seem to know with certainty exactly what I was going to do. But I've just got comfortable with a belief that I know that I can do it.
Yeah.
Exactly how, I haven't worked that out as yet. I'll tell you what I'm going to go through. But I think that's quite often what people are not comfortable with. And so therefore that's again, if you can't get, I suppose the words are get comfortable with being uncomfortable. If you can't do that, then actually you're more likely to feel that chaos because you're trying to find some kind of certainty. Or maybe I'm
No, that's been my theme for the week. I was writing about that at the start of the week about people's inability to say no and about how we deal in conflict situations, how we're always avoiding. And ironically, the first client I had on Monday evening after I'd written the post was exactly the coaching session turned out about that. On Tuesday, the coaching session turned out about avoidance and conflict, right? It keeps on happening. I don't know why, but maybe I'm bringing it to those spaces. But it is that comfortable being uncomfortable. And I know someone had a comment there about the self-doubt and all those pieces, and they exist. They're there. That's part of the uncomfortableness of being human. And it's okay to be uncomfortable, to lean into being uncomfortable, we have to lean into the discomfort as much as possible. We have to get comfortable with it and accept that it's going to be there. It doesn't change our essence. It doesn't change who we really are. And that's kind of the point behind all of that as much as possible. Back to even the grounded piece of ourselves, like who am I below this? Who am I beneath this? Who am I with this and around this? So that the uncomfort, and I had this thought earlier on. I don't know what I was thinking. I was thinking about, I remember Christmas years ago, New Year's, I remember being about 23 or 4 and, or not even, probably about 20. And, you'd send text messages and, Happy Christmas, Happy New Year's to about 50 or 100 people, And I was only thinking today, this year I would have sent it to about 7 people, because I would have met them or seen them and I didn't care. But back then I thought, better, even though they don't care and they don't care and they don't care, because I wasn't comfortable, because I wanted to make sure maybe I was maybe these people like me, maybe it was the right thing to do, And it's such an example of that thinking of a person in their early 20s who isn't comfortable with who they are, isn't comfortable in their own skin. So when you can't be comfortable like that, then you're caught in the complexity and the chaos and you're trying to be whatever it is. But now it's I don't care. If I don't send someone a Happy Christmas, Happy New Year, and if they don't like it, you know what? Then it doesn't matter. What does it really matter? The halo of things, if it's my mother, okay, that matters. But apart from that, it's okay, But it's just that kind of the thing we need, the most uncomfortable thing we need to be comfortable with is ourselves.
Yeah.
That's really the most uncomfortable thing. When we get that, then the complexity and the chaos can fall off us in an easier way.
And I guess that's just it. It's getting comfortable with ourselves and being happy that we are, belong in our own skin. And I think that for me is probably the greatest thing or greatest gift that we can give ourselves, is some of that discomfort, some of that noise of the chaos around us. It comes because it's actually we are trying to step in. Work with the analogy with me on this one. We're trying to step into somebody else's skin as opposed to the one that we're actually already in, and it doesn't work for us. It's back to my point about so my mother trying to give me advice based on an experience that I just have no knowledge of, and that's not me as a personality. So it's going to feel uncomfortable, and I think so much of my early years struggle was around that I was trying to belong in something else that really wasn't me, and so all that did was I just felt more sort of, I suppose, is it the beck and call of chaos? I mean, can you just
and
say that?
life becomes complex when you're busy being somebody you're not, when you're playing this role to this group of people and putting this mask on for this group of people. And then, because that's what I did for a long time. And bloody hell, it was exhausting. And that's when you lose the real sense of, well, who am I in relation to all this stuff that's going on? And that's why it's so important to cultivate your perspective, to understand who you are in relation to everything. And you know, as Sharon Ann said there about the doubt and the insecurities, that is a feature of being human. It's not a bug. That's going to happen every time you get out of your zone of comfort and do something different and new, or you push yourself, or you know, put yourself in a situation you haven't been in before. You're going to get doubt. You're going to feel a bit insecure. But when you know yourself, and you know, like you were saying there, Laura, everything's figure-outable. Back yourself to figure it out. You don't have to be certain before you take steps and take action. You know, you are going to doubt yourself. The most successful people in the world still doubt themselves. They still have that little voice that goes, "Oh, are you sure? We've not done this before." You know, the ego mind is like, "Oh, I don't like this. It's not familiar. Do we really want to be doing this? There might be a bear around that corner." It's like, no, there aren't any bears where we live anymore. You're thinking of 100,000 years ago. You know, I can feel the fear and do it anyway. I can doubt myself, but then back myself and go, "Oh, Dan, are you sure what you're doing here?" Yeah, I've got this. And the other thing that I always tell myself, I don't use the phrase anymore, "Oh, I've got this all under control," because I don't. So this is why I lie to myself. So I say to myself, I haven't got this under control, but it's cool. I'll figure it out.
Yeah. No, I think, you know, I think one of the things about the fear, though, is that fear, you know, steps in and courage goes into hiding when we learn that it's not safe to show up as ourselves, you know, because the world is so quick to criticize and judge and reject that I think it, you know, even if we have a level of belief ourselves, it can be so easy to get lost into that. But you're right, everything is, your word, figure-outable. I just say everything, we can work everything from the unknown to the known. It's just a series of questions we have to ask ourselves that will make the unknown known, and then we can bridge the gap. Simple, isn't it?
I thought you were going to do the Tony Rumsfeld speech there, Laura, about the known knowns and the known unknowns, and thought we were going there for a minute.
Your words uncertainty, Dan, is a brilliant line I heard a few years ago. It's you know, it's the fundamentalists who kill for their religion. It's not the people who aren't sure. You know? And like, that's the thing, you know, where the doubt can be okay. Like, you know, the uncertainty is there. It's always going to be there. To finish on a point, like, you know, when you look at, we try and look at science, right? And we say science is the answer to all things, right? Science is going to figure out, right? So on a micro level, we're looking into the quantum world, and every single day it changes, it gets new, it gets different. It's expanding our consciousness and our way of understanding the world a different way, and it's going to keep going and going and going. So we have no certainty because it's going to keep going. But then at a macro level, when we look out into the universe and we're trying to figure it out, and we still can't figure that out either. So every years and year, our knowledge and wisdom and understanding of the universe grows in these directions. So at what point can we be certain? At what point? Like, at what point are we going to go, "Oh, that's the answer. We found the answer, one and infinity. There we have the two of them. That's it." You know, and so there is no ultimate certainty. There really isn't any ultimate certainty on any one thing, and that's frightening, but also empowering in its own way. So it means we don't have to be perfect in any way. We don't have to know these things. We don't have to be sure.
So the fact that I obviously was stepped into the wrong studio this evening, and you guys were sitting in another studio, God knows which one, you know, hey, I should be fine. I don't have to be perfect.
Exactly.
And Laura, we figured it out, and here we are.
Absolutely, exactly. And what was the worst that's going to happen? You know, hey, we had a giggle to start with, but isn't that what life's all about in the end? But so go on. I'm very conscious that we've kept our wonderful people who've been listening in. Thank you, Joe and Sharon Ann, for joining us. There might be some other people, but you two are the ones who've commented most. What are you going to leave us with? Although I think, Mark, you really kind of thrown my brain into, let's just realize that, you know, there's no certainty in the world. And
yeah, life's uncertain, right? And, you know, we like science now. We like logical progressivism. We like evidence. We like testing things. But science comes from a place of uncertainty. It comes from a place of doubt. That's what science is. It's questioning everything. So, yeah, we can't be certain. We're not in control. The only thing we're in control of is our response, is ourselves, is our behavior, our words, thoughts, and actions. So put your focus there.
It's like, you know, we see people arguing about, well, gravity's only a theory. Yeah, but a theory by definition is the best available answer we have for a situation. So nothing is true. It's just a theory. It's the most accurate answer. But that uncertainty is a very good thing too. And if I want to leave with it, I leave it with the beautiful mantra of Maya Angelou that she said to herself first thing every morning. She said, "What a wonderful day. I've never seen this one before." And it's just such full of hope, full of possibility because of the uncertainty. Who knows what's going to happen today? Who knows? It doesn't matter what happened yesterday. Who knows what's going to happen today?
No, I love that. And what a brilliant place to finish. Well, thank you guys as ever. Next month, we're still working out the date, but possibly 27th of February we'll confirm. But thank you, folks. Have a fabulous evening, and we will see you next month. Take care.